There's nothing wrong with a little agitation for what's right or what's fair. John Lewis.
Yo, guys, what is going on? It is bright and early on Monday, July 27th, and we're very excited to have you back on episode 4 of TTP. Now, this week marks the first episode of John Lewis Week. Rest in peace to one of the greatest leaders America has ever seen. And we just wanted to pay a little homage to one of the greats. Now, we have a big episode in store today, but before that, I wanted to thank all of the viewers who tuned into our videos. If you haven't seen any of them, feel free to check them out on our channel. I also wanted to thank one of our biggest fans, Ryan S. I know that you've been watching the videos and enjoying them. But with that, I think we'll get started.
So today we're going to be looking at one of the greatest games in college sports history, the 2006 Rose Bowl, USC versus Texas. Now, both teams, specifically USC, were at the top of the football world at that time. USC had won the last 2 national championships and were looking to three-peat. Texas was also pretty good. They were the second-ranked team in the year before and had won the Rose Bowl, but not the national championship. So this was a game that was really destined to happen. They were the best teams in by far in college football in 2006. So we all knew that this was going to happen. And now for some breakdown of what made these teams who they were and what led to this game, Chirag, would you like to discuss Texas and how they got to that point?
So this Texas team was amazing, led by offensive mastermind Mac Brown. This team went 13-0, finishing first in the AP poll rankings. And they were just a fantastic team led by great quarterback Vince Young, had some offensive threats, a rookie or a freshman, Jamal Charles. And they really performed well throughout the season, averaging 50.2 points per game, which was the best in college football. And they just dominated every single team they faced. They actually only scored less than 40 once that season, even including the bowl game, it's a very impressive feat for a team like this. And they were led by star quarterback Vince Young, who went on to have a great bowl game. He was a dynamic quarterback. He could pass the ball, he can run the ball, he could really do anything on the field.
I just want to clear something up. So USC was actually the first-ranked team preseason, and they actually finished it coming into the Rose Bowl. They were also the first seed. Texas had been the number 2 seed for most of the season. Again, that's not discounting anything they did. Being second for the majority of the season is definitely an accomplishment. But yeah, Chirag, you can continue.
Wait, also just a quick question about that. Was USC first the whole season the year before as well?
That is worth checking. Either way, when I get into the USC breakdown,
all right, yeah,
I don't know
sure.
if they
maybe
were
not then.
first this entire year in 2005. I know that week 9, technically Texas was number 1, but then it flip-flopped. I think there's a chance that might have been because of a Notre Dame win. But again, Chirag can talk about Texas, then I'll talk about USC.
Yeah, so this Texas team continued the excellence that they were having for many, many years. Actually, since 1998 until 2010, the Texas team led by Mac Brown was ranked. And most of those years, they had 10 wins or more. So just a really dominant college football team, great program, great coach. And throughout those 12 years or so, they had a lot of success in bowl games and national championships.
Well,
and looking at the
noting though that sorry.
Go ahead.
Because I think it's worth noting though that it had been a long time since Texas had won a national championship. They were obviously very successful in bowl games, but it had been around 35 years actually since they had last won a national championship. So they were a good team, but they hadn't been at the top for a while.
Yeah, but they had a lot of success in bowl games. The season. This team was led by, as I was saying, Vince Young. Great stats. He had 3,000 passing yards, 26 TDs, and while rushing, he had a 1,000-yard season. Super efficient, 6.8 yards, finishing with 12 TDs. Just an amazing season for quarterback, very dynamic. And he went on to be a high draft pick, have success in the NFL, and just It started off with this Texas team, leading them to this national championship or this Rose Bowl game and beating USC.
Yeah, I mean, the Texas roster, they had a lot of other players too. I think that Keshav will probably discuss this when you're talking about the game specifically, but
Yeah.
Michael Huff as well
Yeah.
was a top 10 draft pick by the Oakland Raiders. And he ended up, spoiler alert, he ended up winning defensive MVP in this game. But yeah, really good player, really good roster. So they had 2 guys go in the top 10, I believe, of the ensuing NFL draft. And Chirag, what was the number you said of total guys who went to the league?
21 from
21.
this Texas team.
Yeah, so it's a very high proportion there. Even with college rosters being bigger than NFL rosters, that's still really high. But USC, I think when you're looking at this USC roster, there's a lot of talent, a lot of guys who'd come up and were upperclassmen. There's a lot of freshmen, sophomores on this roster who ended up becoming stars in the following years. So this is a really interesting roster to examine. But I basically focused a little bit of my research on the single season, this 2005 year, whereas Chirag was focusing more on Texas's general history. So when we're looking at USC, this entire team was built around 2 guys on offense. So that's Matt Leinart, who was a Heisman Trophy winner the previous season, 2004, and then Reggie Bush, who ended up winning the Heisman this same year. So going into this Rose Bowl, he was at the time the best player in college football, or at the very least, the best skill position player. Now, Matt Leinart.
Oh, sorry. And I think it's fair to say that like it's almost 3 guys, but it's technically, Matt Leinart and the running back duo of Lindell White and Reggie Bush, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Matt Leinart this year, he was good. Like I think this was a career high in passing yards or close to it, 38-15, 28 touchdowns and 8 picks, which is as much hate as Matt Leinart got once he got to the NFL. He never really got a chance. Even when he did, he was pretty terrible. But in college, this guy was a legit passer. He averaged an adjusted 9.3 yards an attempt. And for those of you who look at just yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt is still relatively archaic. I mean, there are better metrics, but for college stats, this is what we have. Just factors in touchdowns and interceptions because not all passing attempts are created equal. He also had a 66% completion percentage, which is pretty high. And he had a lot of help around him. Keshav mentioned some of the skill position players, Bush and Lindell White, but the offensive line was really good. They ended up having 2 guys that same year go in the 2nd round from that offensive line, a 7th rounder as well. Sam Baker in 2008 was a 1st-round pick. Ryan Khalil in 2007 was a 2nd-round pick. Ryan Khalil, in my opinion, when you're looking at these 2 rosters, had the most successful career. It's between him and Jamal Charles. Undoubtedly. Yeah. And if you want to look more at Jamal Charles' career, feel free to check our 3rd video, or actually our 2nd video, which is going to be linked in the description. But yeah, Ryan Khalil, a really good center.
And I think it's worth mentioning as, talking about success in the NFL, I think Brian Arakpo, Brian Cushing, and Michael Griffin also deserve some recognition there too, I would say. They were all relatively successful, I would say.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, I did more research on the USC side of things, but they also had some really good defensive players. You mentioned Brian Cushing, but they also had Frosty Rucker, who spent the better part of a decade, I believe, with the Arizona Cardinals. Ray Maldiga, same deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. Good players. Fred Davis was a pretty good tight end for the Washington football team for a little while. Don't know what to call them, but we'll call them a football team right now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Speaking on that, did they even deserve to be called a football team? Just a brief side note. Like they're so I don't even know if they deserve that.
They're not even a football team at this point. I mean, like, are we even going to credit them as one? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just I mean they've had moments, but that's almost a stretch to call them a football team.
Honestly, they don't even. The Washington team is fair because they have players. They're a team.
By definition, they're a team. Yeah.
By definition, they are a team. Yeah.
But
yeah,
I'll talk more about the offense here. The defense was pretty middling for USC. They were the 35th ranked team in terms of scoring on defense. Gave up about 22 points per game. Texas was a lot higher. They were in the top 10. But USC with Reggie Bush, who won Heisman. Sorry?
Texas was actually, they were 9th with 16.4 opponent points per game. So
yeah,
a lot better than
very
this.
impressive. And Chirag, you did do a little research on Texas's schedule, though. It was a little easier than USC's in terms of ranked opponents. What was their hardest matchup?
So their hardest matchup was against Ohio State. It was actually their closest game in season. This final score was 25-22.
The
They
Buckeyes.
came out on top.
Was Troy Smith, was he on that roster? Sometimes get my years messed
I
up.
think so.
Let's see. You might,
Yeah, Troy Smith was he was starting.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess they were ranked really high. USC had some of those matchups, but get to that in just a second. But Reggie Bush is the main guy on this roster, other than Matt Leinart. Reggie Bush, 1,740 rushing yards. He added 478 through the air with a 10% target share, which is all these numbers are really crazy for a running back. Rushing yards are already impressive, but the fact that he had nearly 500 through the air is absurd. Lendale White scored even more touchdowns. He had 24 and 26 total. So really, really big, the thunder and lightning kind of situation here with USC. Lendale White ended up playing a little bit in the NFL. He had a thunder lightning duo with Chris Johnson, CJ2K. So good player in college. Didn't really live up to the hype in the NFL, but this was a great duo for them. Did a lot of work. Scored 40 rushing touchdowns between the two of them. That's absurd. I don't know if a duo has ever done that on the ground, in college especially. So that's crazy.
Yeah,
And then
He
two
combined for
receivers did
3,000 yards. It's insane.
Yeah, over 3,000 yards. Actually, well over 3,000. It's a really, really good team. They were almost closer to 4,000.
and
Yeah, they were closer to 4,000 yards.
I'm not sure if you brought this up, but also Reggie Bush got 1,700 yards on 200 touches. 200 rushing attempts. That is
So he actually averaged
insanely
8.7 on the ground, and you factor in the receptions, he actually averaged 9.4 yards per touch. I mean, it's just every time you gave him the ball, he basically got him first down. That's actually just take a second and think about that. And also how easy it is to get a ball to a running back compared to a receiver. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Reggie Bush, Heisman this year, ended up getting vacated, but hell of a year. And the receivers who did the bulk of the work for this team, three of them: Dwayne Jarrett, Steve Smith, and the tight end Dominique Byrd. Dwayne Jarrett in particular, 91 catches, 1,274 receiving yards, and 16 touchdowns. Ended up becoming a second-round pick. I don't think he did a whole lot in the NFL. We'll check in on that in a second when you guys want to find that. But then Steve Smith, not the future Hall of Famer Steve Smith, different Steve Smith, had 957 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Dominique Byrd at 306 as a tight end. So these guys did a lot of work for Matt Leinart.
About Dwayne Jarrett,
and
he never really found any much success in the NFL. Really not at all. After 4 seasons with the Panthers, it just didn't work out at all in the NFL.
Okay. But yeah, he was a high draft pick, so he did well in college, especially this season. And then before we move on, I quickly wanted to touch on, I mentioned this earlier, this Notre Dame game. So this Notre Dame game didn't affect, I don't think it directly affected USC's standing. Like USC was second on October 24th, and then they became first on October 31st. They beat Notre Dame on October 15th, so a little before this. But this Notre Dame team was ranked 9th, and USC had a really crazy victory. They were down, I believe, 27-31 or 28-31 in the waning seconds of the football game. And Matt Leinart, quarterback sneak, they were at the goal line. He sneaks it. He gets denied initially. If we can find a picture of this, I guess we'll throw that up, or a clip.
Yeah,
even better.
Yeah.
Crazy play. Reggie Bush shoves him in. They score, and that undoubtedly played a role in their invitation to the BCS championship game, because that's just how it was back then. And another correction, they didn't actually win. They won in 2004 and had that vacated due to a whole scandal there. That's a video for another day. But 2003 they didn't win. They were actually denied a spot in the championship, and they played in the Rose Bowl, but not the championship. But yeah, this USC team had a lot of players who made it to the league, specifically on defense, but this offense was incredible as well, at least in college. So really good team. A lot of scandals behind them. Pete Carroll was the coach. So
Yeah.
Really, I don't even. This was a great team. It was a great team.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
USC is not the better team on this day. So talk about the game a little bit.
Mhm. Now, yeah, this was mentioned earlier, but both teams had some of the best offenses in the league, averaging around 50 points a game, undefeated, going 12-0. And this was like a game that just seemed destined to happen. And actually, the year before, when Texas won the Rose Bowl, they said, "We'll be back here next year." And man, did they come through. And looking at this game, it's just looking at the box score, how it went. It's exactly what you would expect. Two of the best teams in football going at it in the greatest college sports game that we've ever seen. Now, this game was close throughout, but just to give a brief game summary, USC got on the board early after an early fumble by Texas, and the offenses were slightly stagnated, but they all both picked it up, got back to their usual ways, and Texas capitalized after USC turned it over twice in the first half. They weren't looking very, very good on offense, and they went in the second half with a good amount of momentum, up 16-10. And it seemed that Texas would be able to take over with that momentum, but both teams ended up trading rushing touchdowns. And after a missed field goal by Texas, USC's three-peat looked like it was going to become a reality as they scored again, taking an 8-point lead. And despite Texas actually trying to close in the gap with the field goal and cutting it to 5, the defense really just couldn't keep up with arguably the best offense in college football, as Leinart connected with, as Rohit mentioned, Dwayne Jarrett to take a 2-possession lead with less than 7 minutes remaining. And now, looking at this, just like if you're just watching this game, obviously we were too young to watch this, but when you see a team as good as USC with that lead like that, you don't think they're going to squander it. But Texas didn't go away. They marched down the field, closed it to 5. Vince ran for his 3rd touchdown of the day. And I think someone may have mentioned earlier, but Vince Young's rushing stats this game were, what were they exactly? Vince Young's rushing stats were
There were 19
19
carries for
carries
200 yards, 3
and 3
touchdowns.
touchdowns. 3 touchdowns. Okay, that was his second rushing touchdown of the game. But that is crazy for a quarterback. Jamal Charles really didn't even need to be used much this game. He averaged 10.5 yards a carry for 200 yards as a quarterback. Like that is really like just unheard of. And
one thing I noticed, just
Mhm.
don't mean to cut you off, but really quick,
Yeah.
not a great, at least the last touchdown. I don't have an exact record of this, but the final touchdown he ended up scoring, not a designed run. He just made his reads, and USC's defense, which, as I mentioned, was 35th in the nation, which is not very good, obviously, for a team playing the championship game. It's kind of Swiss cheese in this game for Vince Young. So he had these. I don't know how many of these runs were designed. He was just getting big chunk plays on big runs down the field, just making his reads, making the right play.
Yeah.
To put into perspective, when Dale White and Reggie Bush combined for 206 yards, and Vince Young himself got 200 yards on like 10, 15 less carries.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if maybe someone or Chirag, because we were looking at the Texas side, can look at this, but did Texas do many design QB runs, or was it mainly just Vince Young doing it for himself throughout the season? Like, did they have read options, or what was their main offensive game plan?
I think that they had design runs, but in this game, especially late in the game, a lot of it was just kind of in the moment situation. There were like long third downs on that last drive, and he just went for it by running the ball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and a lot of USC's defenders who would have made the impact on this game, linebackers like Ray Maluga, Brian Cushing. I also think Kaluka Mayava, who might not be like a very well-known NFL player, but he was a notable linebacker at USC. Those guys were all freshmen. They were all underclassmen, and they became really good by their senior seasons. But at this point, USC's defense didn't really have that big time playmaker. This was an offensive team. Their O-line and skill position players.
Yeah, and nothing could really contain him there. And I think looking back at this now, going back to the game, so Texas, they chipped the lead. They chipped the gap to 5, and USC they're doing pretty well in the next possession, looking like they can close it out. But then they face a 4th and 2 at the Texas 45. Now, once again, as someone mentioned earlier, the coach of USC at this time was Pete Carroll. And I would say this was another one of his very questionable coaching decisions. Pete Carroll puts Lendale White in the backfield. And in the documentary, they actually mentioned they knew that when Lendale White's in the backfield, they're just going to jam it in there. And it's a questionable coaching decision mainly because you have Reggie Bush, who's a much more versatile player, and he'd make the defense have to do a lot more scheming and guessing on what's going to really happen because he opens a lot of options, right? As Rohit mentioned, he was really important in the passing game. You could either run it as well, but he was just a very agile and versatile player. But with Lendale White in the backfield, you knew it was going to be a run to jam it in there. And Texas stopped them a yard short. And this is when it looked like Texas may actually have a chance. And Lendale White actually said himself, Reggie should have been on that play. And it makes sense considering that, the options are really closed out when Lendale White is in the backfield, especially on a 4th and 2.
And I don't want to talk too much about this, but like Pete Carroll, fourth and goal, or not 4th and goal, but you know what I mean? Like at the goal line, shit's happened with Pete Carroll in those situations. And he's gotten hate for throwing the ball. It's almost like if you fail, like no matter what you do, no matter what the play is, you're going to get hate for it. If Lendale White punches in, people are going to be like, that made a lot of sense. They have one of the best offensive lines in the country. They have Lendale White, who is just a power, just a bruiser, just a beast. And I don't love Lendale White as a player, but in college, the guy was just stronger than anyone else. So it made sense. If it worked, I think he would have been praised.
Yeah, definitely.
But Pete Carroll just seems to have bad luck in these situations.
No, and I don't think it's like a bad call because Lendale White he could have got that in there, but it's just that Reggie Bush really opens your options, and it's a specific time where you don't really want to take a risk, especially when the team knows what you're doing, right? They can expect what you're doing in an easier way. And
I'm not, sorry, I just want to say Matt Leinart, he wasn't the most explosive rusher. Like, I'm not going to mention his rushing stats because they weren't super impressive. But, I mean, he wasn't a non-factor. You watch him move around the pocket. There's some athleticism there. Like, obviously, I mentioned that sneak against Notre Dame earlier. He would have been an option out of the backfield. Also, a less predictable option, if that's what people are concerned about Lendale White. But, there's options.
Yeah, and I'll get that clip in there just so you guys can see how it went down. Yeah. And, I mean, going from there, I guess moving on from this, USC's defense looked like they may have a chance at stopping them because on a 3rd and 12, Texas is stopped 5 yards short, but then there's a critical face mask penalty that gave them the first. And, I mean, it's just a big mistake by USC's defense there. That's another clip I'll put up there. And you'll be able to see that when you see how it went down. And then on the most critical play of the game, with around 20 seconds remaining, it's 4th and 5 at the USC 8. Vince did what he did the entire game. He shred up that and read that Texas defense, and he ran it in for a touchdown again. And the rest is history. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was like a ground attack game for both sides. Yeah. I was actually pretty caught off guard. I don't know if caught off guard. I mean, I was surprised to see that Vince Young had 40 passing attempts and 267 passing yards. No touchdowns, no picks. But you see 200 rushing yards from a quarterback, you expect him to have like 95 passing yards. But this was literally just Vince Young doing work. The other running backs got a combined 16 carries. 3 of them got a combined 16. Includes Jamal Charles. Again, check out that video. Dude only got 5 carries. I know.
I think you were mentioning something. You mentioned about the Vince Young Heisman thing that he didn't actually take the Heisman that year. And,
Sorry, go on.
And I mean, instead he took the championship game, and maybe that was the reason because that's not what he really wanted. I don't know. Is there an exact reason known?
I don't know what his reason was, but it was not like it was exclusive. If he wanted, he could have had bullshit. But some context. USC, even if they had won this game, it wouldn't have mattered. They had a whole was it a recruiting scandal?
Yeah.
Yes. So they had a whole scandal. They had all of their wins from the season were vacated. Their Pac-10 championship doesn't exist anymore. Their Heisman for Reggie Bush is gone. So Vince Young was offered that Heisman. He declined it. And Reggie Bush is on good terms with him, and a lot of people praise Vince Young for that decision.
Yeah. And no, I just think you just looking this entirely, I'm not saying that Texas didn't have any other offensive weapons, but that's almost like a single-handed win by Vince Young there. Not single-handed, but it's just really that's the definition of leading a team to victory.
I mean, it doesn't seem like the rest of the team played badly, because there were 30 catches for 40 attempts, so it was still an amazing quarterback and offensive performance in general.
Yeah,
they didn't even give the ball that much to the running backs, but I think they didn't have to. They weren't forced into this game style, but this was just the result of the whole season and what they learned so far. That's how explosive Vince Young is, and how much of an impact he can make on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, even in.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say these teams are very balanced. So we've been talking a lot about the offenses. USC actually had 18 more total yards. I think that must have came on that last drive for them, that last ditch effort. They both had one lost fumble, both had 30 first downs, but USC had one more turnover. So I think Texas's defense, led by star defensive backs Michael Huff and Michael Griffin, were both first rounders. Also, I wanted to mention there's a lot of Tennessee Titan players on the field here. Michael Griffin, Vince Young, Lendale White. But Michael Griffin had an interception here. Michael Huff, I believe, won defensive MVP. So the defensive guys here, the defensive backs for Texas, helped out Vince Young immensely, gave him a shot.
Yeah. And I mean, just looking at this, I think it's exactly. I mean, as I said earlier, it's what you would expect from a game like this, right? This is it's very evenly matched in terms of offensively, and it ended like this. It's really a storybook ending. This game was also destined to happen, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like this is the type of game that whichever team gets the ball last kind of wins this game.
Yeah.
If USC got even maybe 30 seconds more, I think it could have gone to OT. USC could have scored a touchdown. It could have really changed the whole entire game. But just because the situation where Vince Young ran it in with 19 seconds left and didn't give a lot of time to USC to score a field goal, that's how it ended.
And I 100% agree. USC, the clock ran out on a Matt Leinart. I guess I don't know if he tried throwing it away or something, but clock ran out. They were honestly right around midfield.
Yeah,
if you gave them the Strugs at 30 more seconds, Reggie Bush made a huge play prior to the final play. So the second to last play, Reggie Bush made a great play, got them downfield. If they just had one more touch for Reggie Bush on that possession, they would have been in field goal range. Or honestly, knowing Reggie
maybe
Bush,
even a timeout could have opened up a lot of.
They were just around 5 yards short of. No, they were 7 yards past midfield, so.
It would have been a 60-yard field goal. So they probably would have needed about 10 to 15 yards, knowing the college kickers. But again, 10 to 15 yards is not a whole lot when you have all those playmakers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But it's just all these little things. Imagine if they had gotten that first down with Lendale White on the 4th and 2.
Mm-hmm.
That would have taken away some time for Texas to score. Texas, what Vince Young scored with how many seconds left? Yeah, 19 seconds. It's little things, they make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, who's to say that? I mean, if Texas also didn't, I know that considering the time is the same, if Texas didn't convert on 2 as well, it'd be much more pressure on them on those last few plays, couple plays of the game. I don't know, just some.
Yeah. All the stuff's hypothetical though.
Yeah.
I mean, it came down to that last quarter. Those last 8 minutes when Texas started coming back.
This is a really high scoring quarter too. The highest combined score for a previous quarter. This third quarter was 21 combined. This quarter was 32. Texas really I don't even know what to say. It's just Vince Young obviously wasn't the greatest NFL player or the greatest prospect in the world, but a real winner here.
Yeah.
The trajectories of these two teams, neither of them really came out of this well. I mean, I'll say they came out of it well. They had some good years after this. Obviously USC, had John David Booty following the Booty and Moody backfield, if you will. But then they had obviously Mark Sanchez. But then after that, it kind of fell apart. Matt Barkley had a little bit of a disappointing career, at least a disappointing finish. They did have a Rose Bowl win with Sam Darnold over Penn State, but they haven't reached the pinnacle of college football again since this. They haven't won a title. In Texas, I don't think you hear every single year it's like Texas is back. Yeah, they haven't been back in however many years.
No, I think that. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna ask you. So what were you gonna say? What was the deal here with Texas?
I was gonna mention something about USC just after adding on to that. I think USC in the 2010s they really fell off from their prior glory, except for the year, I guess, 2011, which were pretty good.
Yeah, that was the Matt Barkley year, and that was also the year where he could have came out in the NFL draft that year. He would have been the third quarterback behind Andrew Luck and RG3. He decided to bet on himself, went back, and then he was bad in 2012. USC, I believe, was pretty disappointing that year. And that was where, again, I mentioned Sam Darnold. He had a good career in Pasadena. But they never reached the top. Or at least at the top of they never won a championship. At least they won a Rose Bowl, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, they've never reached that same level of success in general. And I think Texas really hasn't either.
Yeah, I mean, they had a few good years, 2008, 2009, even 2010, they peaked at 5. I'm just curious to see who they had on those rosters. That isn't the topic of this video, and I think we'll wrap it up pretty soon. But I think it is worth looking back. Yeah, Colt McCoy was the quarterback on some of those Texas teams. That was basically, before Sam Ehlinger was at a really good career. Colt McCoy was basically the last quarterback there. That's kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
So we have 2010 again. I mentioned they were. So 2010 was a really bad year for Texas. So they started off the year number 5, and they finished 5-7. So that was kind of where they officially fell off. The year 8-5, 9-4, 8-5. And ever since, Texas hasn't been the same. This last decade really has not been Texas' a decade.
Yeah, ever since
that's why
left.
Yeah.
They're just, barely on a good season. They're over 500.
Barely at that.
Yeah.
And the years following the national championship, though, I mean, I guess that's, as we talked about earlier, it was an offense led by the one and only Jamal Charles.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Colt McCoy, because Colt McCoy did have
he was good. He was good. But,
Jamal Charles. No, he had some impressive passing stats. Yeah, Jamal Charles is great. And USC, as I mentioned a little while back, a lot of their freshman linebackers in 2005, Ray Maluga, Brian Cushing, Kaluka Mayaba, they all stayed 4 years. So from 2005 to 2008, this team lost a combined 6 games. And then after those guys left, I'm not saying this is the definitive reason, but they won 9-4 in Pete Carroll's last season in 2009. And then they didn't have the greatest, Lane Kiffin was okay, but again, they didn't reach the pinnacle. And really their best season came in that Rose Bowl victory with Clay Helton and Sam Darnold.
Yeah, the one over Penn State, right?
Yeah, over Penn State. Saquon Barkley. So that was a fun game, but
that was a fun game. You talk about that one another time.
I don't know about that, but if you guys want to see my comment down below. But I do think one of the reasons this game was so big, other than like obviously we've talked about the storylines coming into this game, and the game itself was really crazy. But these were two exceptional teams that this kind of represented the peak for both of them, or maybe USC was the year before, but this is kind of the end of an era. The Vince Young era obviously ended this year. The Matt Leinart, uh, Reggie Bush era ended, or the Matt Leinart one. Yeah, so this was kind of the end. But
And I think Matt Leinart was entering senior year. He could have easily entered the draft 2004, but he really had wanted to three-peat this year. So this was a year when he had huge expectations for, but it was just overall, just what a game.
yeah, and one more time. So they didn't win in 2003. They won the Rose Bowl, but they weren't in the BCS National Championship game.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, it would have been a third straight Rose Bowl victory, that's obviously meaningful.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I'm looking at some last things here. I think we covered everything, and I think it's been a good topic here. A really good game. Obviously, we didn't get the chance to watch it. We were a little too young, about 3 years old. But this was a really good game and an interesting one to look back on, even 15 years later. If you guys have anything to add, feel free to butt in. But I think that'll do it for the 4th episode of TTP. And we will see you on Wednesday.